We're going to hear from panelists about their thoughts on how Asheville will be impacted by climate change and what actions might help mitigate these impacts. So our panelists tonight include, and they're going to give a 5-minute presentation, and then we'll kick into some Q&A. So we've got Amber Weaver, Sustainability Director for the City of Asheville. Geoffrey Habron, Professor at Furman University and member of the Sustainability Advisory Committee on Energy and the Environment, the City of Asheville. Stephen Hendricks, Chair of the Asheville Urban Forestry Commission. Kat Houghton, Executive Director, Community Roots. And Jennifer Runkle, Environmental Epidemiologist with the North Carolina Institute for Climate Studies. All right, Amber, can we start with you?
So I'll just begin with the first question, which is how will Asheville be impacted by climate change? And I believe that if you've lived here for maybe 24 months, you've already seen and or experienced the impacts of climate change. And if you are a community member from one of our frontline communities, then you've been living with the impacts of climate change. In 2017, the City of Asheville worked with NEMAC, the National Environmental Modeling and Analysis Center, to identify some of our climate threats that face the City of Asheville. And we definitely have experienced, especially last year, flooding and what flooding can do to our city. We also know that if you've lived here just maybe 2 years, you experienced wildfire and the impacts of that. I recall walking out of City Hall after work one day and my eyes stinging and having a difficult time breathing. And that's when our forest was on fire. And I'm sure many of you have also experienced landslides. It happens quite often after a heavy rain event. And then as I said, through our study, we also looked at the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index and overlaid a lot of the information and identified our most vulnerable community members, which are a lot of the redline communities that were mentioned earlier. Those community members have been identified in some of the areas that will be threatened by flooding. So those are the things that we have identified at the city, and they are embedded in a lot of our work around equity and sustainability and planning, and how we're going to plan for the future to address these climate threats.
Thank you, Amber. Shall we go next down the list with Geoffrey?
Hi, I'm Geoffrey Habron. I'm a professor of sustainability science at Furman University, and I live in West Asheville. And I'm on the Sustainability Advisory Committee on Energy and the Environment. So I'm wearing multiple hats of a resident and a SACEE member and then sustainability science faculty member. So it's always kind of interesting to put those things together. What I sort of see in terms of the role of trees is, I guess I'll give you a little bit about our sustainability science program. We teach sustainability science at Furman, and we teach our students around 5 competencies to achieve sustainability, and so that kind of influences my view on this. So the 5 competencies are futures thinking, so you have to be thinking about the future, trying to anticipate change. Strategic thinking, how do you accomplish actions and goals that you want to achieve. Values thinking, so we recognize that there are things such as values and ethics and things like equity. And then we have collaboration, so what you heard a lot about in terms of the Louisville story of collaborating and working across with Greenworks trying to have its initiative. And then the last one is systems thinking. We have to think in terms of systems, how things are connected and feedback. So I'm really hoping that in order to take this on, that we're able to put those competencies into action. And so what I think about the tree canopy is it covers, it's probably one of the ways in terms of systems that you can cover multiple benefits. And so there's been a lot of work on looking at socio-ecological systems, looking at resilience, and this idea of synergy. So how can you engage in certain actions that give you multiple benefits more than doing individual type things? And so when we look at the idea of trees, we get to cover a lot of things. Even if you look at the comprehensive plan for the city of Asheville and you look at the areas that are going to be covered in terms of whether it's livable built environment or the natural environment, interwoven equity, these are things that when you put in tree canopy, you get those. We already covered the ecosystem services for some of those presentations that we had earlier. So that's a bonus. We also have, as SACEE, we have a couple resolutions that the City Council has put forward in terms of carbon reduction and 100% renewable energy goals. All of those are going to be benefited by improving our tree canopy cover because we're going to have, obviously we got the urban heat island effect, and then over time with the increased heating. So we know if it gets hotter and people are going to turn on their air conditioners more, how are we going to reduce our carbon if that's what we're going to do? Oh, let's try to go 100% renewable. Well, if the demand for energy keeps going up and you're trying to add more renewables, it's going to be harder to get to 100% renewable if the demand keeps coming out. We also know there's equity issues. So around the energy, I had a thesis student working with Blue Horizons, where's Sophie, somewhere around here, last year working with the low-income home weatherization program. And so we also talk about equity in terms of who's going to be more vulnerable to heat. It's those people that have not access to air conditioning. Homes are going to be warmer, utility bills would go up. So that's an issue of why are we trying to fix the problem? We're just taking care of symptoms versus addressing the problem. And so when we think about the economic benefits, planting trees gets us more longer term than trying to deal with the symptoms after the fact. And I'm happy that a number of speakers have already talked about the issue of equity and distribution. So one thing to keep in mind is when we're looking at tree canopy, I hope that we also keep in mind of this distributional equity that comes along. And I think, again, I'm happy to hear that some of the speakers have already addressed that issue. So yeah, those are kind of the main things that I wanted to address. Again, is trying to be mutually beneficial, looking at our existing goals and how do we do those. We've already signed off on the comprehensive plan, so if we want green infrastructure, we want more tree canopy cover. Again, I think we can cover these things in mutually beneficial ways.
Hello. I'm Steve Hendricks, and I'm chair of the Urban Forestry Commission. We're going through a name change from the Tree Commission to the Urban Forestry Commission to more accurately reflect the things we're working on. Our job as a commission is to give good advice to City Council. And if you'll bear with me a minute, I'll go back in some of the past history of Asheville. We are in a unique setting here. It's on a mountain plateau with a lot of rivers, a lot of rainfall, particularly in the higher elevations. In the late 1800s, there was tremendous problems from flooding here because of rampant logging in the mountains, bad agricultural practices. It led to the establishment of national forests and national parks in the Appalachians. Seems like we don't always learn the lessons of the past, but with climate change, we really need to get our act together because those things that have affected us in the past, the flooding, are things that are going to keep affecting us in a more intense way. The same with the heat island effect. I'm an advocate of smart growth, and part of smart growth is making things denser as the city develops. But at the same time, we need a science-based approach to building our green infrastructure. And I think the canopy study is a good overview of why we need that. The urban forest is kind of the keystone as far as building a resilient green infrastructure. And those are the areas where I think the city needs to come together as far as sustainability issues. As far as the Urban Forestry Council, Urban Forestry Commission is concerned, we need ordinances that work. We need plans, such as the Urban Forest Master Plan that would tie to the city comp plan. We need an urban forester to run a program. If we have that in place, a lot of opportunities are ahead of us that are quite exciting. The Asheville Climate Action Initiative can really take root if we have those things in place. And that's what we're advising City Council to do, is let's act right now as far as getting a program in place so our canopy doesn't keep sliding downward. We have to take some action or it's going to keep going downward. And I think we have some ways to address it that will work.
Thank you, Stephen. Kat?
Trees currently under the law are considered property. That to me is the crux of this issue. So if you own a parcel of land, we call it a parcel, it's just like any other object, a shoe or a car. If you own a parcel of land, you own the trees on that land. And you can do pretty much whatever you want with those trees. Which means we have to really think about the laws that we have in place if we want to really protect our trees. So under the law, there are two categories when it comes to rights. One is rights-bearing agents, so typically humans are rights-bearing agents, although not in all cases. And typically things that fall into the other category is property, those that don't have rights and can be owned by the rights-bearing agents. So the entirety of our natural world, other than a few specific species and animals that have been pulled out over the past couple of decades, the entirety of our natural world lands in the property category. So there is a movement, it's a global movement called the Rights of Nature movement, which is going on in different countries throughout the world: Ecuador, Bolivia, Colombia, India, Nepal, Sweden, the UK, and some parts of the US, to change that, to shift that around so that ecosystems and the natural world can become rights-bearing. It's called the Rights of Nature movement. Some of you may have heard of it. And what this attempts to do is to give legal standing to ecosystems, so not to a specific tree, but to an entire ecosystem, recognizing, as Geoffrey was talking about, that this is a system, that trees operate in relationship with each other, in relationship with the climate, in relationship with the soil, in relationship with the other beings, animal, human, whatever they are, that live in that ecosystem. So the Global Rights of Nature movement is looking to enforce, to enable ecosystems to have rights. So for instance, New Zealand's a great case study. They recently, actually just last year, gave rights to one of their rivers. It's their third largest river. It's called the Wanganui River. Now that entire stretch, I think it's 180 miles of river in New Zealand, is a rights-bearing agent. So no meter of it is anymore owned by human beings. There's a board of trustees that's been created to stand up for and enforce the rights of that river. So what that means is that people now in New Zealand can file lawsuits against corporate polluters that are seen to be violating the rights of that river on behalf of that river. And they're doing that. People are doing that in Ecuador. It's been written into the national constitution in Ecuador. Parts of the Amazon rainforest in Colombia are now being protected in that way. In March of this year, Lake Erie, through a citizen-led ballot initiative in Toledo, Ohio, they gave rights to Lake Erie. There's also some other rivers in the US that have gone the rights of nature. So one of the things Community Roots is working on here in Asheville is to establish a local ordinance. It's called the Climate Bill of Rights, which has a clause in it that's the rights of nature. So we're looking to establish the rights of nature here in Asheville, which would give us just a lot more legal standing in terms of protecting the trees and the entire system that keeps those trees in existence, so that we can all benefit from that.
Thank you, Kat. All right, Jennifer, you'll wrap us up.
Jen Runkle here. I'm an environmental epidemiologist. My research really seeks to measure and understand the human health impacts of climate change. And I think to answer the question, how will Asheville be impacted by climate change, we need to take a step back and look at what we've observed for North Carolina. There are really two key points for North Carolina. It's going to be warmer and it's going to be wetter. So since record keeping began in 1900, we've observed about a 1 degree increase in average annual temperatures for North Carolina. But the most recent decade has been the warmest decade on record, where we've seen record-breaking average summer temperatures and a very large number of very warm nights. So what can we expect for the future? Climate model projections state that North Carolina is headed for historically unprecedented warming by mid to late century. And this means that heat waves may potentially be more intense. For precipitation, we've not been able to discern a clear trend in annual precip since record keeping, but climate projections show that, in fact, North Carolina should expect significant increases in precipitation. So what does this mean for cities? The 2018 National Climate Assessment had a key finding that says cities in the southeastern U.S. are particularly vulnerable to climate change, more so compared to cities in other regions. And the two critical components of vulnerability are people, or people's health, that's what I'm really concerned with, and critical infrastructure. People and these critical infrastructure will become increasingly vulnerable to extreme heat and flooding, and even vector-borne illnesses brought on by changes in a warming climate. Asheville, our city, is no different. In fact, Amber mentioned recently, last year, we had a climate resilience report that identified 4 climate threats for our city: flooding, landslides, wildfire, and extreme heat. So let's take the case of extreme heat. During periods of extreme heat or during heat waves, on the health side, we notice significant increases in emergency department visits and hospitalizations for cardiorespiratory illnesses, mental health disorders, as well as heat-related illness. We also observe that older adults, the very young, people who work outdoors, even the socially isolated and economically disadvantaged are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat. So if we scale back just a bit, cities, and think about cities, climate change really acts as a risk multiplier, whereby these external stressors like the urban heat island, increasing energy demands, rising social inequalities, as well as air pollution and an array of other external stressors are working in concert. Climate stressors and non-climate stressors are working to actually aggravate and increase human vulnerability to extreme heat, which leads us to why we're here tonight. Research has shown a number of health-promoting benefits from our urban tree canopy. And in fact, I've actually brought a few that I want to talk with you tonight. So research has linked the presence of urban trees with cooling city streets anywhere from 2 to 4 degrees which has been linked to reduction in heat-related deaths and cut energy cost, which has been mentioned. We've noted reduced rates of cardiac disease, asthma, and stroke due to increases in improvements in air quality just by having more trees in our city centers. We've also noticed reductions in stress just by us going out and engaging in nature. It elevates our mood. It disrupts those anxious thought patterns. We also see in the literature that by increasing access to urban parks, city residents will go out and enjoy those parks, will engage in physical activity, and that reduces obesity levels. And as a nation, we understand that obesity is an epidemic. And lastly, trees help us manage stormwater, keep pollutants out of our waterways, and reduce urban flooding. So I'll end on this note. There is hope. Over half of the global population currently lives in a city center. Experts suggest that by 2015, roughly 68% of the global population will live in a city. This increased population movement, as well as the rise of these urban stressors, is promoting a tremendous amount of opportunity to engage around these issues collectively, just as we're doing tonight, to begin to come up with solutions and more responsive and adaptive climate action plans. We understand that trees play a vital role in the health of urban residents and can also be used to combat the urban heat island, as well as reduce our exposure to extreme heat. And trees may even be a more cost-effective way to improve urban health, but I would argue we need to improve upon and expand upon the evidence base that can be leveraged by urban planners and decision makers as we move towards a brighter future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. All right, we have time just for a few questions. I know there are so many questions. This is for Geoffrey. What is your message for the younger generation?
At the SACEE meeting, we had youth come and talk about, how they felt about how we're leaving them with a planet that's worse off than we had. I think that's part of the issue, is recognizing that I'm not going to see the worst of the climate situation. It's going to be my high school senior. And so we have to act now, and so we are borrowing off the opportunities of the future, and that's the definition of sustainability, is you're supposed to be planning for future generations. That's how we should be making decisions, not how it's going to benefit me now as 7 generations down. So when you look at a budget, we can't be thinking about 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. We have to be thinking generations. And so what I tell the youth, that's why I'm a professor, is I really try to engage our students to participate in the process. But there is, why I started with the I'm sorry, because it's like we're putting it on them to say, oh, get out there and rally and go do climate strikes, and because of decisions that I've made or lack thereof, or and so forth. And so I think that's an important part, is to acknowledge responsibility in terms of how we are. And so I go to the youth and say, yes, I acknowledge my role, or our collective role, in their future. So, there is hope, but the reality is we are in a climate crisis. And so it's what we're going to do over the next few months and years that are going to put up or shut up, so to speak. And so if we do care about future generations, we need to get it done.
All right, Steve, I think this pertains to you. What are the tree protection ordinances that exist in Asheville, especially as it pertains to development?
What are the existing ones?
Mm-hmm. And is anything that focuses on development?
Okay. There is some requirement in the ordinances that we have now to plant on commercial property as buildings are developed. However, we're way behind other cities as far as we're not replacing what we're losing. The requirements are pretty minimal, actually. We don't have requirements even for showing where existing stands of trees are located when a development proposal comes in. We need to look at where we are as a city, and we don't want to be on the bottom half of cities with our history here of being a green city, our Olmsted legacy, great national parks and national forests here. It should make us want to be a model green city and not one that is trailing behind. Let's get our act together and act now, because we've got a warning that we're losing canopy. We're probably losing about 1% a year. We're going to be down in the 30% range before long if we don't take some action.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Following up, this one is for Amber. How is the city collaborating within the city government and with non-governmental partners?
So the Office of Sustainability has been working diligently with other departments on, one, determining how we want to move through the climate resilience assessment, and also identifying projects through the city's capital improvement plan, our CIP process. We're looking at projects all the time and determine, is this going to be helpful in fighting some of our carbon mitigation goals, or is this something that is going to help with our resiliency efforts? Other things that we are also doing happen at a much higher level with the state. We have been working with Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80 Clean Energy Plan and participating in the Urban Lands Committee, which has been talking about how do we want to utilize trees in our natural systems, and we're looking at carbon sequestration. And we've also been working with the Executive Order 80 on some city initiatives as well. And so we're trying to work at both the state level and then working back in our own city and thinking about it in a systems way, and how we can also collaborate when we're working with our Sustainability Advisory Committee, looking at policies and how they'll affect the organization throughout the organization. We're also looking to implement and find other opportunities as well as we look through other departments' work plans. So it's something that we try to do at all points in time and when we're making decisions. I would also say our office works with several different nonprofit partners throughout the city. We realize as a city that our nonprofits serve an excellent purpose and help with our sustainability goals. So every year we work with Asheville got the Food Policy Council. We were at the Food Summit earlier today working on composting, talking about how to better enrich our soils and working with soils around carbon sequestration as well. We work with Bountiful Cities and Asheville Greenworks in partnering on compost workshops, tree walks, tree identification. So really helping the city work with our community members on what it means, this big work that we're doing around sustainability. I think that's really important I would underscore and agree absolutely with everyone's discussions around education and what that means to our individual community members. There's a lot of things going on, and I think people can get easily distracted, and it's important to be able to partner with community members, help get our messaging out on how we're trying to address sustainability in a very, hopefully moving towards a more systemized way of thinking.
I know there are so many questions that did not get answered. There are great materials that I would love to have access to. And Dawn says that check your emails, that there will be access to all the materials you saw tonight. And then I know this conversation will continue, and I'm sure Asheville Greenworks will figure out an amazing way to keep this conversation going. But I just want to say thank you so much to Asheville Greenworks and for everything, for you guys for coming.